You're such a guru in the industry. I was so excited when I got your confirmation you're willing to have this conversation on Monday morning. So since then, I've been talking to all my lawyer friends, and I say, "Oh, Mr. Kurtzman is going to see us. Oh, that's awesome." So I would love to do an introduction, but Ira Kurtzman, it's just is the guru of the immigration lawyers industry. He also speaks Spanish, which I thought is amazing. And also he's the author and editor of what we call the Kurzban. So it's one of the highest sales for American immigration lawyers. It's a publication that when he first started, like maybe 20, 25 years ago, is a very thin book, but now it's so thick. Now I think you even have two copies now, right? It's awesome. So all of us gets it. And because most of us, we have quite a few lawyers and law firm, the paralegals, so we always fight for our, I was looking for a copy in the office. They all hide it because it's expensive, So everybody put their name on there. So that's like the Bible of our industry. And also, before he started with this one book, two book, we normally have to go to those treatises. We have to go to all these heavy, heavy law books that you really couldn't bring it to court. So nowadays, whenever we go to court, we bring our own Kurtzman, and then even the judges say, "Oh, can I borrow your Kurtzman?" and see what they say there, which I thought is amazing. I'm also a little bit envious and jealous because I always thought, "Oh, if only I could be like him." So may I call you Iris? So
Of
Iris,
course.
thank you. So tell me a little bit about what made you do immigration. How many years ago were you practicing, and what are your other body of work aside from this Kurtzban?
Well, Margaret, I was never going to be a lawyer. I went to graduate school to teach political philosophy and political theory. And kind of midway through my career as a teacher or as a graduate student, really at the time, I decided to also go to law school because this was in the 1970s. There were a lot of political activity, as you may know, going on at the time. And I was at the University of California at Berkeley, and I went to Berkeley's law school. And when I graduated, I was not going to be an immigration lawyer, though interestingly enough, Berkeley was only one of two universities at the time that had even a course in immigration law. And I wasn't particularly interested in it. And when I graduated, I became a civil rights lawyer and a labor lawyer. And I went to Florida to practice civil rights work and to do labor law. But part of that civil rights work, as it turned out, was helping Haitian refugees. Because though at that time in the 70s, and particularly in the late 70s and early 80s, Haitians started to come by boat to South Florida. And the contrast between how they were treated and how Cubans were treated really became, in many respects, a civil rights issue. So I was asked by the National Council of Churches, the Catholic Community Service Agency, and eventually by the Haitian Refugee Center, which was set up and run by Haitians, to represent them. And that's how I got into immigration law. And
Wow.
by 83, I started to teach immigration law, and the book was really my notes and teaching. And as you may know, the first edition was, I think, less than 400 pages, double spaced. It was really a very, very small book about many areas of immigration law. And I know you are one of the eminent practitioners, so going back over the years, um, the regulations were, less than a thumbnail, really. And now, of course, the regulations are a huge book and very complex. So my book really reflected what was going on since 1990. The first edition was in 1990, went from 400 pages now to over 3,000. So it's been quite a long march in terms of learning immigration law. And for those of us like yourself who have practiced, we always have this desire to continue to learn and to, know more about the intricacies of immigration law. And that's what kept propelling me to do the book. And so one of the ways that I could keep up with immigration is to simply keep up with the book, keep writing the book. And obviously it's gotten bigger and bigger over the years.
And I love the way at the back of a book in the olden days. I mean, now I follow your book and your career because I'm always curious about who you are. I always see you as this big hotshot. When years ago, like 2030, when I first met you, I'm like, oh my gosh, he seems so nice, because that book is amazing. And I love the way at the back of it, you always have like all the cases and then every edition, because sometimes I don't get the new edition because my partners would steal it or something. So I have to go back to the old and I said, oh, let me see the new edition. And also I love the way the naturalization laws prior to so and so. And then I like the way I just have to, in fact, I show my clients when they come in for consult, I'll say, oh, you're born in 1942. Let's look at 42 because I like the way you identify. It's just short and simple. It's nothing legal about it. It's just date of birth, your naturalization, blah, blah. After 64, 65, what happened? I really think it's not that I'm trying to kiss up to you, but I think it's just an awesome,
Yeah,
the way you did it. Yes.
thank you. Thank you. I wrote it not as a treatise. And, we have the immigration law and procedure, which has been, a treatise for many, many years. It's now in 12 volumes, very, very detailed. I wrote this book really, and that's why we call it a source book. We don't call it a treatise because it's really designed to help lawyers, exactly what you're saying. I mean, I remember as a young lawyer, and you may remember this too, trying to figure out something about L1 visas.
Yes, and no Google, no AI, no nothing. You have to go to a library. And we were so poor, I can't afford the library annual fee. So I always have to go to legal aid or somewhere. Say, can I borrow your card?
Right.
Those were the days. I don't mean to cut you off. Yes, yes.
So I remember going to one of the treatises and there was nothing on L1s. You had to first look at intercompany non-immigrant visas. Then you had to go to intercompany transferees. And then eventually you would find something that was an L1. And I said, well, why don't we have an index that just says L1?
That's
Everybody
right.
knows
Yeah.
what an L1 is, or an O1, or a P1, or a P2. And so the book was always written from the perspective as a practitioner, how do I get information quickly and easily? And that it's not a substitute, obviously, for doing very heavy research on any area. But I do try to put in all the cases, all the immigration cases every year. I try to put in all the new regulations. And when I know you were referencing this, when it comes back to, let's say, the Haitian Refugee Immigration Fairness Act or legalization under 1986, what I do is I tell the practitioner looking in the book, go look in the 13th edition. We're in the 19th edition now, or go look in the 14th edition. And I try to take out things that are really no longer current, but people can still have access to it to maintain the currency of the book. And of course, now with Biden, Trump, it's almost impossible to keep up because, Trump, every day they're changing something. In fact, I'm convinced that they have a schedule where they are told, introduce something every day, say something every day, or issue a new regulation every day so that it's constant. It's kind of overwhelming.
Right.
So the 20th edition will look a lot different, I think, in terms of the content, at least. I don't think the overall book, but the individual content about certain subjects will look very different because of all of Trump's executive orders, his changes on H-1Bs and H-2As, the changes, obviously, on deportation, all the new Board of Immigration Appeals. I was telling one of my colleagues the other day, during Biden, the Board of Immigration Appeals almost disappeared. There were so few cases issued, and it didn't seem like they were very active. And now you're getting 2 cases a week, 3 cases a week. And the Attorney General is putting a little footnote in there that says, these are binding precedent. So what they're doing is they're scouring through every single Board of Immigration Appeals decision that's been made, pulling them out, designating those as precedent. That's why we're having so many different.
I'm sorry.
No problem. So I think that's where we're at. I think the next edition is going to be one that really everybody should have. I'm not, trying to promote the book, but everybody should have because of the vast changes that are being made, whether it's detention or H1s or something else.
So listening to you in the past, maybe 2 minutes, you already touch on employment base, you touch on litigation base, you touch on family base, and you touch on quite a few. Can you explain to our audiences, when did you evolve? Because you first started with Haitian, which means it's asylum and removal cases. In those days, deportation, later removal. So can you explain to us when you evolve? Because I know you run a really serious firm. Do you like impact? Because also I would like to hear your experience. You won that, and even a lot of us refer you a lot of cases. You won that the setup, the New Jersey University, the setup for more than 1,000, 10,000 kids, and you got them back on status. And then after we have to explain to the clients what your litigation is. I even send you an email and thank you for responding to me, because if I don't understand something, I'll send Ira an email. I'll say, Ira, what do you mean by this? Ira, and he responds, which I thought is amazing. But can you explain that case? I know I'm asking, but I would like to see how you evolve from maybe employment based to remove. And do you still do individual, or you do more impact litigation now? Or what are you doing?
Yes, I mean, we still, in fact, we're working with a firm from Chicago and a national firm now on the Haitian TPS case, trying to challenge the termination of TPS for Haitians as of February 3rd. And so, yeah, I mean, my whole life really in terms of immigration has been to try and do impact litigation. And that's really how I started out with the Haitians. I went to the Supreme Court 3 times. We did 12 or 13 major class action lawsuits at the time in the late 70s and 80s. And some of those had major effects. So I started out as a career as a civil rights lawyer. So to me, litigating was not something foreign. Many of our colleagues start out really as administrative lawyers and don't do that much litigation. But when I started out, I was a litigator already from the civil rights cases. So it was kind of second nature to me. And we developed at the time, I think, some very interesting theories. I think we were the first lawyers to use the Administrative Procedures Act, which is kind of regularly used now by both Trump pro people and the government right now, as well as people litigating against the government. And state attorney generals are using the APA as challenges. When I first started, the APA was not used, and
was nothing, right?
We developed that notion of notice and comment, and that you couldn't have an arbitrary regulation and stuff. So I think that's how I started. And then maybe it's just a reflection of my practice, because as you know, we do everything in the office. We do business, immigration, we do appellate work, we do federal litigation and so forth. So I think it was just the development of all the different areas. And that's reflected in the book, because again, the book is really for lawyers who are practicing, not some theoretical idea. But, I'll be sitting there, just to give you an example, a question always comes up: when can you adjust your status? And then if you've ever been out of status. So I'm, looking at the regs and come across a particular regulation like 245.1D3, for example. If you leave the United States after you were out of status and come back, can you still adjust your status? And so all of these things came out as a result and are in the book as a result of practice, really. How do you do an adjustment? How do you do a naturalization? How do you do, as you mentioned initially, well, a person would walk into my office and they'd be born in 1942. That would have different consequences than if they were born after 1986 as to whether or not they're derivative citizens or not. So the book, I think, expanded naturally, both by what immigration was doing and by our own practice. And, I can't remember everything that's in the book, especially at this age. So, I go back, somebody asks me a question, I'll go back and look in the book that, even though I may have written it or someone else may have helped us write it, I need to go back and refresh my memory about any individual thing. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's how the book expanded into L1s and H1s and Es. We started to do business related and all of a sudden we had O's and P's, and we started to do that. We represented, professional athletes and that kind of thing. So to me also, I never wanted Margaret to do like one thing, because I just felt just doing one thing, like doing H's, some of the
It's
major.
boring. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, some of
yeah.
our colleagues in major immigration firms, they basically do H1Bs and labor certs, and they churn them out in huge, huge numbers. And it was just something from an intellectual point of view that just wasn't attractive to me. And I've always been fortunate in being able to do what I want to do. And I think you probably have the same view because you have such a big firm and you can do lots of different things if you want to do those things.
Now, another thing that that's why I really want to introduce professionals like you to our listeners, our audiences, who hopefully are some lawyers, but some other professional feel, how do you protect your mental health in the last, even under Obama and under Biden, it was bad. I mean, people think now it's bad. Okay, Obama reduced like 3 million people, Biden, in spite of all the sudden people coming up. So how do you do your work, especially in your areas, all class action, impact litigation, and all these high level stuff? I worry about our profession, people getting into mental health issue. The next issue is, look, how do you think the trend that immigration is doing with AI now? Because there was a time I really enjoyed digging deep, looking at this, looking at that, the Kurzbans. Now it's like everything is AI. I even go to check. I still think Lexus is not as good as ChatGPT on immigration, and I still think Grok is not as. I still like ChatGPT. I know it sounds stupid. It's only $20. And I tell our firm, I say, not that I trust it. Nowadays, instead of asking one of the experts in the law firm, our firm, I would say, oh, let me check GPT. And they say, Margaret, I say, I'm not going to tell my clients, but let me check it first. The C-spot issues, the aging out issues. I mean, these are silly, shepherdizing, a matter of queue. I mean, sorry, I talk too much, but can
No,
you
no,
please?
no.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's an excellent question, and I think people who've been practicing as long as you and I, ponder this issue of, where is the role of artificial intelligence in this whole process? And, my view is anything that can help, we should look at. But my experience has been, at least up to now, and then obviously it's going to get better over the years, but at least up to now, AI and ChatGPT make mistakes, and they don't have the kind of broader knowledge and experience that a person like yourself or people in my firm bring to any particular problem. They can tell you certain things, and some of it I found is actually wrong, but they can generally give you an analysis, but they don't have that 30 years of experience, you know, they don't have that deep knowledge about, well, what does this client who's in front of us really want? Now, will they in 10 years? Who knows? But I wouldn't rely, and obviously you know that lawyers who are relying on ChatGPT to write briefs have gotten into pretty serious trouble because, um, AI is designed to give you an answer. So even if the answer is a fantastical answer, an answer that really doesn't exist in reality, they'll make up cases, and that's why some of the lawyers were getting into trouble because AI would come up with a theory, particularly in litigation, and then cite cases that don't exist to prove their point. So AI is helpful. For example, I think AI is very helpful in ordering documents. So we had this discussion, in fact, yesterday about Freedom of Information Act. You get a Freedom of Information Act request. There are now services that will take that in 5 minutes, organize all the documents, and with a table of contents that might have taken you and I an hour or 2 hours or 5 hours to go through. So there are things I think that are very, very helpful. And there are ways in which you can use it to help write letters and everything else. But I don't think there's anything at this point that takes away from a person like yourself who's had all this experience, or people in my office who've had the experience of kind of going through it and making sure everything is okay and that this isn't made up, and going back and thoroughly checking it. And I think anybody in AI has said that. I mean, the people in our profession who are kind of the leaders in this technology, even they've acknowledged you don't just do an expert's letter on an EB1 case,
Yeah.
and just throw it in there without carefully having somebody review it.
Yeah, one example is just 2 or 3 days ago, I was checking because Honduras, there's a new thing, I'm sure you know, just came up like 2 weeks, 1 week ago, saying that TPS, because of the federal court case, is coming back. So, of course, I went to ChatGPT. Actually, I went to Lexus. They have no answer. I went to ChatGPT. They say TPS is still considered admission or no admission, whatever. So I said, that's wrong. So I have to ask one of our lawyers. I mean, it's on right on USCIS. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's right there. It's on the web, I mean, how can you give me? So I actually told ChatGPT, I said, oh, the answer, I was very nice. I don't want to tell them they're wrong, but I said, just to let you know about that. So hopefully whoever is the next one who asks about these Honduras TPS or whatever, admission, no admission, because there was a time Sixth Circuit in El Salvador, all TPS says that admission. Of course, it's not an admission. So things like that. So I just thought, I told ChatGPT, make sure next time when someone asks, you say this. So I'm sort of proud of myself. Yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I've gotten a lot of wrong answers. I think it was 2 years ago they asked a bunch of questions to these AI programs and me, and we had a competition. Like when they do chess against.
Oh, that's fun.
And at that point, at least, I won. I'm not sure I would win now, but they're okay, but they're not perfect. So
now, let me ask you this. That's one thing that's bothering me. And I thought about actually doing, maybe I have to recruit you to help. I'm thinking of doing some sort of like a round table of like a race of lawyers who ask them questions. And us lawyers, we're all vain, we're all proud, we think we're going to win. But what my problem, and I think I'll lose in all these races, I'm really not very good in cases. Like I'll say, oh, that Sixth Circuit case 2 years ago said this, or matter of QE say this. But then if you want me to talk about the case which is after matter of Q, I'll be like, or but you are good. You remember those cases. How do you do that? Like you remember names of cases, and I don't. Like I remember C-SPA, but then I have to remember what started C-SPA. Schusterman wrote that book, and I'm the lawyer who did matter of when. So I have to go back and look at Schusterman's book. My matter of when, I won matter of when, but it was appealed and denied or something. You know, I'm the first lawyer in the Ohio who got Judge Aldrich, who died,
Right.
to say there's a federal in federal cases, if it is that an intelligent plea to a criminal, you could vacate. But since then, of course, the circuit court overruled. And since then, there's no courts in America that say you can vacate criminal case unless you go to that whatever 1255 or whatever action.
Yeah.
So, but these are cases where how do you, if I'm a younger lawyer, how do you teach them how to remember and also how to know is people like you who really paved the way for these cases for them to start doing the AIs, the next practice?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of it comes from the area, you develop an area of expertise. Like we obviously are doing a lot of habeas cases now because of the situation of detention. And, and we do a lot of mandamus cases because this is an administration that's decided to end immigration by slowing it down. And so I think after a while, you kind of develop that body of information. But quite frankly, I go back and we do research, and I go, one of the advantages of doing the book is reading a lot of those cases before you may need them, right?
Okay.
So you tend to memorize some of them, but yeah, if you ask me, can I cite most of the cases off the top of my head? The answer is no. I tend to go back and look in my book actually on a particular issue. For example, the Supreme Court's decision in Patel now has a progeny of 100 or more cases. I don't in fact, I don't even want to know because they're so bad. But I generally don't know, names of any of those cases, but I have an idea of where the law has gone post Patel on a number of important, litigation issues, like when can you sue and under what circumstances. And for example, if somebody is denied adjustment, can you go to federal court and sue, or will the government assert Patel? And the case, and I'm not sure it's helpful particularly to remember the names. I think it's more important to understand, where there are favorable circuits that support your claim and where there are unfavorable circuits. I mean, if you ask me, what are the toughest circuits on immigration? It's obviously the Fifth, the Eighth Circuit, and to some extent the 11th Circuit. If you ask me which ones are more favorable, I'd say the Ninth, the Second, maybe the Sixth, sometimes the First. But it also depends on the issue. So one of the benefits I guess I have from doing the book is, I can tell you that if you're in the First Circuit and the persecution, their idea of persecution, at least in the decisions, indicate that physical harm is really necessary and fairly serious physical harm. So even though they don't disavow the notion that you could be persecuted without being physically hurt, most of their cases are people who've had, I think, what you and I would fairly regard as horrible things happen to them, and they say, well, that doesn't amount to persecution. So
Correct.
that's helpful in the sense of knowing. But I'd like to go back to, if I may, your question about kind of the mental health and issue, because I think it's very important. This administration, in every single way in which they have conducted themselves from January 20th on, are designed to demoralize immigrants, uh, demoralize non-profit organizations and demoralize the lawyers who represent immigrants and nonprofit organizations. And I think we have an obligation to stand up and fight. I mean, this is the historic role of lawyers. We're kind of the last bastion of supporting the Constitution. Criminal lawyers have always said that for years, and even when they're representing unpopular clients, particularly when they're representing unpopular clients. Um, but I think that's our obligation as professionals and as people who truly believe in the rule of law and supporting the Constitution. I think it also means that we have to be professionals. That is, we have to really keep up and know what we're doing, not just be angry, but be very strategically focused on how can I get this client out of detention? How can we win this individual case? Recognizing that we're in an uphill battle. I think the district courts have been exemplary in their support of the Constitution. The courts of appeals, particularly when the judges, the majority judges, are appointed by Trump, have been less so. In fact, there was a study that just came out in the Times a couple of days ago that said when Trump judges are on the bench, they rule for Trump 92% of the time in the Court of Appeals. And certainly the Supreme Court, in its shadow docket, has not really been very supportive, in my view at least, of constitutional rights of immigrants. So, but these things change, and I think with the death of Nicole Good just this past week, tragically, I think we're beginning to see different things happening in terms of not only the court, but public opinion. Public opinion does not support what's going on. And the court ultimately, despite whatever it says, will to some extent follow public opinion. And I think we have to keep fighting, keep chipping away at that. As I said, I come from a civil rights background. So to me, fighting the government is exactly what we should be doing. Fighting injustice is exactly what we should be doing. And even at my age, my idea of continuing to support, the basic principles of our country and fight every day, I just is what gets me up in the morning. Some people get demoralized. I understand that. But I think if you take a different view with that, we should be out there fighting every day. You'll be much healthier psychologically
Thank you.
and good. So I guess that's my best advice to the lawyers, and nobody believes it's easy because, as I said, their whole project is designed to demoralize the population. And, that's why they're sending 2,000 people into Minneapolis or, 2,000 or 5,000 National Guard into Los Angeles and everywhere else. But even on the National Guard issue, because people stood up and fought and went to court and said this is wrong and got decisions from local district court judges, the Supreme Court, as you may know, in Illinois v. Trump, just a couple of weeks ago, decided that the National Guard were improperly used. Everybody was afraid that Trump would just be able to do anything and whatever he wants to do. And I think we're now starting to see that facade, the emperor's new clothes. It's now starting to decay, and the more it decays,
Can we have more time? I'm begging for more time. I love listening to you. Yeah.
I mean, the more it decays, the more Trump gets shrill, and Stephen Miller is shrill, and the more they lash out and everything. And that's okay. Let them do whatever they're going to do, but we're going to keep fighting and going ahead. And I think doing that will change things. I mean, we saw something this past 2 weeks in the Congress of the United States, and this gets back to immigrants list, and hopefully we'll talk about that.
That's what, yes, I would like you to talk
Uh,
about the immigrants list that I
um,
totally support. And you
okay,
give
but see,
honors and
no,
awards.
and we appreciate that. But in the last 3 weeks, we've seen the House of Representatives ignore the Speaker of the House and have three or more members of the Republican Party vote with Democrats to put a bill on the floor, whether it was on the war powers with respect to what Trump was doing in Venezuela, or other issues involving the funding for ICE and so forth, that are an indication that their whole strategy is crumbling. So I would think, people should take solace in the fact that they keep fighting does have results, and I believe it has had those results certainly in the last several weeks.
And can you talk about immigrants list? What made you started it? You have a lot of friends on it, and we sort of make it into an Ira Kurzban gathering. Every time you have a meeting, we sort of make it a fun thing. So can you explain that list to us?
Okay, we started Immigrants List in 2006 now, I guess, 2006. And why did we start Immigrants List? Immigrants List is both a PAC, which means that we give money to members of Congress who we believe will be supportive of immigration, and a C4 organization, which goes out and tries to educate the public generally about immigration. And why did we do it in 2006? We got a group of lawyers, and Margaret, you have been terrific and been a big supporter of Immigrants List. And I just want to say on the podcast how much I appreciate everything that you have done to promote it and help it. But Immigrants List, ironically, was started for a different purpose than what we're seeing today. It was really a response to the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996, which was probably the worst piece of immigration legislation in many, 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 many years, because that's the legislation that brought us expedited removal at the border. It brought us mandatory detention of people for the first time in American history, where you can be detained even if you are not a threat to the public security or national security, and even if you're not a danger to others, and even if you're not likely to flee. Section 236 says that the Attorney General shall detain. And one of the problems, of course, that we're having now, which is a byproduct of that act, is Trump is building these massive detention centers to keep people detained while they're deciding to do whatever they want. But in 2006, the idea was, let's look at expedited removal, let's look at mandatory detention, let's look at the 3 and 10-year bar, and let's look at judicial review. And let me just briefly talk about the 3 and 10-year bar. Margaret, you know this because of the years you've been practicing. But before 1996, if somebody was in the United States without status and you kind of wanted to do the right thing for that person, you could do a labor certification. And then you could get a petition approved, and the only penalty was they would go home, get their visa, and come back to the United States. What the 10-year bar did is not only destroy a whole area of practice, right, of labor certifications for people who are out of status, but what it did is it created a huge undocumented population in the United States. So, for example, if I'm married to an American citizen, but I came without inspection and I stayed here, I can't get my residency in the United States because I wasn't admitted and inspected. But traditionally, I could just go home, have a medical exam, have all the papers done, and then come back to the United States. Well, after 1996 in the 10-year bar, it said if you're illegally in the US for more than a year, and let's say you're here for 5 years and you marry an American citizen, you entered without inspection, and now you want to get your residency, you really can't do it unless you file a waiver. And most applications are not waivable for other reasons that I'll explain. But if you don't get that waiver approved, your only avenue of relief is to go home and wait 10 years. So what has that done? For the person who's taking care of my elderly family member, who I want to do the right thing. And I'm sure, Margaret, you had this same experience as I've had, which is getting calls from senators and getting calls from federal judges and getting calls from others saying, look, this person is taking care of my family member. I want to do the right thing. I want to help them become a resident. And then at the end of the day, the only penalty is they would go home, get the visa, and come back. But now they can't go home because if they go home, they won't come back for 10 years. So there's no incentive for an employer to do it. So I always bristle at the idea, particularly, I must say, when Republicans say, well, we have 20 million people in the United States who are illegal or undocumented. Yeah, we have 20 million people because you passed the law when the Republicans were in charge of the House. And I want to be bipartisan here and say, unfortunately, Clinton signed that bill. But it was a bill generated by Republicans and actually in secret. And that's a whole other story for another podcast, but in secret. And that bill is the reason why we have 10 to 20 million undocumented people in the US, because if they leave, even to try and get their green card, they can't come back for 10 years. Most Americans don't understand that and don't know that because it's a complicated technical issue of immigration law. But in terms of policy, it translates into people not leaving. For example, if I marry a resident of the United States and I'm here and I want to get my residency, the same thing. If I'm here and I want to do a labor certification, I want to show that there are no American workers able, willing, available, qualified for the position, I can do that. And if I do that, I should be able to get a green card, but I can't leave the United States to get it because if I leave, I can't come back. So the 10-year bar has had profound implications, and it was passed by a Republican House and Senate at the time. And then the last part of it, which I think has enormous consequences, when I grew up, and Margaret, I'm sure when you grew up, you understood that no one is above the law in the United States, the concept of the rule of law. And when a government agent does something improper, you have the right to sue them. In the 1996 Act, they passed 17 different preclusion statutes, meaning you couldn't sue. You couldn't sue on an adjustment of status under certain circumstances, on cancellation of removal, on waivers. If a waiver was
consular processing, you name it. Yes, visa petitions. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And so, I always talk to members, and putting on my hat of immigrants list, I talk to members all the time and say, this is completely un-American. In other words, an officer can say to somebody on a waiver, I don't like the shirt you're wearing today. I'm not going to grant it. There's no review of that because the government says, and the courts have said, that that's a discretionary action. So, in fact, in one of the TPS case we have now, when the lawyer was asked the question, well, could Secretary Noem just flip a coin and determine whether or not Haitians would have 350,000 Haitians would have to go back to what everybody says is a chaotic, violent situation in Haiti. Could she just flip a coin and make that decision? He said yes, that you have no right in federal court to sue us for that. That's outrageous. He's wrong for other reasons, but that notion, the notion that the government can do whatever they want as a matter of discretion. And in your practice, Margaret, I bet you are seeing more and more cases where they say, well, we're not going to give it to the person. We don't think he's qualified. But also as a matter of discretion, we're not going to give it.
Once I see that word discretion, I'm like, my gosh, how do you overcome discretion? There's no way. I mean, there is a way, but it's a horrible. And do you know now on PIP cases, military, if my son and daughter is in the military service,
Right.
I could adjust. Now, at least in Cleveland immigration, the judges, they're denying my motion to reopen for the purpose of PIP because it's speculative. I mean, hello, my son is servicing the military. How dare you tell me I still have to remain undocumented plus a final order of removal, even though the law specifically said that you could do it speculative? What do you expect, blood? So I'm very angry, but that's why I asked, how do you overcome this? But you're right. Sometimes you feel powerless, but the next day you get up, you go to work, and you just figure it out. Yeah.
And so Miller and the others, to bring it up to date, even though we started this in 2006, very smart. They know the immigration law. They know what they're doing, and they know how to manipulate the law so it's not even possible to sue. So what you're seeing is exactly the kind of thing you're talking about, or where they just simply say, well, as a matter of discretion, we're not going to grant this benefit, whether it's cancellation of removal, political asylum, whether it's on a petition, an EB-1 petition. We don't think the person qualifies, but even if they did, as a matter of discretion, we're not going to give it to them. And that's a way for them to insulate all of the illegal actions that they're taking by simply saying it's discretionary, knowing you can't sue. See, the one thing I have to say about Miller and the others, they understand immigration law, and we should never underestimate their ability.
They're not stupid. They had years to plan it. They know they started in Trump 1, but in Trump 1, at least he's surrounded by people who does, so we need to do something about this. I mean,
Right.
It's terrible. Yeah.
And the Supreme Court certainly didn't help in giving a green light on Trump versus the United States and saying Trump has immunity, because that's just led to horrible consequences. The notion that anybody in America can be above the law undermines the fundamental principles of what this country is about, undermines the rule of law, which is what made America great. I mean, probably the greatest aspect of our country is not only the Bill of Rights, but the idea that everyone is obligated to follow the rule of law. And what we're seeing is their efforts to reach a goal of what I honestly believe is either zero immigration in the United States, but certainly zero immigration with respect to brown, black, and Asian people in the country. And I have said this, and people have said it. I said this 4 years ago, you may remember, and people thought I was crazy when Trump was there the first time. I said their goal is to not have anybody from Africa, Latin America, Asia in the United States. They are white supremacists, they're white racists, and that's their goal. And so, Trump, for all his unusual behavior, often says exactly what he's thinking. And he finally said it the other week about why he was calling Haiti, I won't say it on your podcast, but he was denigrating Haiti as he has, this notion about eating cats and dogs, which Vance has admitted was a total lie. But he said, look, why do we need people from these countries? We want people from Norway. Why can't we get people from Norway? He said it in one of his speeches in Pennsylvania last month. So I think we have to be very wide-eyed about what is going on in America and fight back. It's our country. It's not Donald Trump's country. It's all our country. And what made America great all of these years is immigration. And I would just tell you one story. Um, when these kids were coming to the border and they were pushing them back, um, my father left his country when he was 12 years old on his own and eventually made his way to the United States. And under the current policies, I wouldn't be here. Now, maybe Miller and Trump think that's a good thing, but the reality is, people like you and I and others, we wouldn't be in the United States under these policies. The future people, the future engineers, the future lawyers and doctors and scientists. I mean, you have a crazy person like Elon Musk, who himself entered the country basically illegally, as the Washington Post reported it, being anti-immigrant. And it's hard to understand why they think this is a better America when you don't have people from all over the world. America, as President Reagan said, is that beacon on the hill. And that's what attracted people to this country. You could come from anywhere. I think we need to keep fighting, and people should not get down. They shouldn't be depressed. It's hard. It's difficult. But no one ever said that it would be easy to continue to fight for freedom. We just have never had that experience except in the revolution.
And with that, Mr. Ira Kurzban, thank you for joining me on this podcast. I just adore you, and I'm sure I'm representing a lot of our fellow colleagues who said that. Yeah.
Thank you. Very sweet of you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah.